very common question that I get from people beginning their musical journey or people that begin to take piano lessons is, what's the difference between a keyboard and a piano? And if I'm going to purchase a keyboard, is it okay to start on the keyboard versus a piano, or either way? What are the good qualities of doing each? And then the other question that I get that's kind of all in the same vein is what do I look for in a keyboard? What's the difference in the great price ranges of a keyboard? So let's seek to answer that and hopefully kind of impart some information of the instrument that we're striving to play. Of course, a piano, especially a top quality piano, it's a work of art, and all great pianists would rather play a real piano. But in the real world, a real piano takes up a lot of space. It has to be tuned several times a year at about $100 a pop. And it has real live issues such as humidity will affect it, the climate you're in, whether you have AC or heating in that particular room, whether it's on an outside wall that will cause that to go in and out of tune, the seasons of where you live. There's a lot of variables with a piano. So a real piano is a wonderful thing, but it's quite expensive to maintain. It takes quite a bit of time and effort, and it takes up quite a bigger footprint of your area that you have to devote to music than a keyboard does. The keyboard's advantages is that it's always in tune, is that unless you break a key, which you're going to have to really play hard repeatedly on one note to break one on most good quality keyboards, and it's also, so it's not going to go out of tune, it's not going to have string issues, and again, it's not going to take up that big a space. For a church, most people have gone to a keyboard just because of the tuning issue. A church, often the heating and cooling is only turned on when they're going to have service times, so the temperature drops in the sanctuary, or in a performance type like a club type setting, same thing, which causes the piano to always be out of tune. So most people in a live performance type setting have gone to a keyboard for that reason. But a real piano is a joy to play. The cons of a keyboard are that it's not quite the same as a piano. It doesn't take quite as much muscle to push down the keys and to play fast and rapidly as a piano does. And so you develop a better technique. You develop a better muscle build up on the piano. And it's going to be more of a joy to play just because you're with an acoustic instrument. The keyboard will be a little bit easier to play if you get one that's not quite as weighted. And so there are pros and cons to each. But again, we're using a keyboard because in this setting it's a lot easier. And in most settings, the keyboard is going to be the way to go. Okay? On a real piano, you have an upright piano, then you have grand pianos. And the big difference is the length of the bass strings. So on an upright piano, the lower notes down here will sound a little tubby. They won't sound boom and full because the bass strings are shorter. On a grand piano, particularly a longer grand piano, the reason it's long on that one side is that's the bass strings. And the longer the bass string, the more full it's going to sound. So that's essentially the difference. There are several well-known piano makes, and I have my preference, but it's basically a personal preference as far as that. When you get to keyboards, it's an all-new animal because you're paying for the electronics, but you're also paying for the action or the actual keys. And a good rule of thumb is that you either need to make up your mind to pay for the action or pay for the brain or the computer part of it, and not both every time. And what I mean by that is at first, you really don't need a lot of sounds. You don't need more strings and a nice little funky little groove. What you need to start off with is I would say buy, first off, the most keys that you can afford, and then the most full action or the most weighted keys that you can afford in a particular keyboard. When you talk about keyboards, a real piano has 88 keys. If you count from bottom up to top, and this is an 88 key keyboard, which simulates a real piano, but a real piano has 88 keys. Most keyboards most keyboards are not 88 keys. A lot of times they'll chop some off. If it's a 72 keyboard, it's chopping and some notes off from the bottom, it's chopping some notes off from the top. If it's a 64 key keyboard, and you can count them, it's chopping quite a bit off the bottom and quite a bit off the top. If it's a 42 keyboard, you're getting down very small as far as the amount. It keeps coming off the ends essentially. So it only gives you the middle of the keyboard. Okay. So at first, the first thing to look for in a keyboard, I would say, is get as many keys as you can afford. Ideally, you want all 88 keys. But if you can't afford 88 keys, get the highest number that you can afford. That's first and foremost. I'd rather have an 88 key keyboard without weighted keys. In other words, they're real easy, like real plasticky to push, than I would to have a 40 key weighted key keyboard, okay, that felt realistic, but I only had 40 keys. So first off, shoot for the most keys that you can afford. The second thing then, what you want to consider is not voices, but the action and whether a key is weighted or not. These keys on this keyboard are weighted, which means that they feel very, very similar, not quite as hard to push down, but very close to a real piano. There's a little weight behind the keys, and if you were sitting with several keyboards and pushing on them, and you were to push a non-weighted keyboard and a weighted keyboard, you would immediately see the difference, that there's a little bit of a weight behind them. They actually have a weight built into the plastic, and so that makes it. There are fully weighted keys, there are semi-weighted keys, and then there are completely not weighted keys. The first thing you want is as many keys as you can get. Then you want to get as much weight as you can. Semi-weighted are better than no weight at all, because you're developing a little muscle memory. And then if you can afford it, you want fully weighted keys. So ideally, the perfect keyboard is an 88 key weighted keyboard, okay? And that's exactly what we're playing here. And then the third consideration would be all the sounds or the brains of the instrument. As long as it has a good piano sound, you're not really worried about all the other ones. But then the third parameter, if you want to go up and you have all the big bucks to spend, then you want to get an 88 key weighted keyboard that has all the fancy gadgets that you want. Now that's often very, very, very expensive. What most people do is they have what I would call a controller, and that is they have an 88 key weighted keyboard, just like this one is, that's very simple as far as it sounds. It doesn't have 45,000 different sounds and synthesizers and all that. But then what they do is I do in our church, and I have purchased a more expensive keyboard that has less keys and it's not weighted, and I use a simple MIDI cable, about $5 in a music store, to MIDI out of this one and into that one, and when I play this keyboard, it plays the other sounds, so I get the action, the weighted key action. I have all 88 keys, nice weighted action on my controller keyboard, and then yet I'm actually playing the fancy sounds of the other one. And then what happens is, as time goes on and those sounds become dated, I just buy a new, smaller version of the latest, greatest fancy keyboard, and I always have the greatest sounds, and yet I also have the 88 weighted keys, and I'm not repeatedly buying the action. Hopefully that makes sense. When I was in college, we had a piano practice room, and we had about 8 or 9 pianists to choose from, and there was one that they had come in and they had tightened the action up, and that is, it was an upright piano, but they had made it so hard to play that it was just as hard as like a 9-foot grand. It was very, very hard, and that piano was always open because nobody wanted to play on that piano because it really took muscle. I mean, after 5 or 10 minutes, your fingers are literally aching. And nobody ever wanted to play on that piano. And I used to go to that piano on purpose every time. Every time I played on that piano because I knew one day there was going to come a time where I needed to perform a song on a 9-foot grand. And if all I ever played was a keyboard without any weighted keys, once I got on the 9-foot grand, my hands were going to start cramping. I wasn't going to be able to do anything because my muscles wouldn't be prepared for it. So I played on the heaviest possible piano that I had, and then to go from there, go down back to a keyboard or to something that's semi-weighted keys or to an upright piano with normal action, no problem, because I've already developed the muscles. So it really is to your benefit to get a keyboard with the heaviest keys that you can find. But again, the first parameter is to get the most keys that you can. And all a keyboard is a digital piano. Now, I may have other sounds, but essentially when we say keyboards, we literally mean pianos, organs, anything that has black and white keys. And all a keyboard in the sense of electronic it's an electronic version of a piano. They've sampled and recorded a piano and then recreated it in an instrument that's not affected by moisture and humidity. So shoot for as many keys as you can get. After that, try to get the heaviest action that you can, and then let sounds be third, especially at this stage in your career, because you just want you're doing muscle memory. Another thing is, every once in a while there's little kids keyboards that have little bitty keys. In other words, the keys are much smaller than, or maybe just a fraction smaller of a full-size keyboard. Stay away from those because playing music is a muscle memory game, and so you want to be able to understand that. Like for instance, if I close my eyes and I put my pinky on note here, I can automatically play the octave. A D and a D because that's ingrained in my head that's the octave, and this is the 7th and this is the 5th. Okay, it's a muscle memory game, and when you start changing the size of the keys, you start messing with your brain. You're not going to have that muscle memory, and that's how you be able to do things well on a piano, is to repeat it, the muscle memory. So go for full size keys, and as long as it's not a kid's keyboard, you'll probably be okay. Get as many keys as you can. And basically get something that you like. You want a sturdy stand and get it set up right like we talked about in the posture, and enjoy it. It won't be something that you're going to sit down and play, and put it in a place where it's going to be accessible. It's always out. That way you'll sit down and play more. The more you play, the better off you're going to be.